Thank you so much, and look, I'm really delighted to be here. It's really exciting. I've been coming to Denmark for the last 20 odd years, and I must congratulate what Denmark have done. I mean, the experience, it's a kaleidoscope of experience in the food area, and I've been blown away. I actually went on a bike ride with a man who has a kitchen on a bike, and we actually explored different areas of Copenhagen that have actually spring up with some new ideas, and it was a real experience. He said he loved the outdoors, so he brought the kitchen to the outdoors rather than the other way around. So it's actually quite exciting, and I think you all need to be congratulated. It's a real exemplar for other countries around the world of how to actually transform a nation and perhaps open their eyes to how they can transform their, food industry. So I work for an organisation which is called Food Innovation Australia Limited. It's actually a federal government initiative. We were set up about 4 years ago, and it was quite an interesting time because I've had about 5 prime ministers, and I think I've had about 5 or 6 ministers at the same time as well. So we've had a really interesting challenge. But the reason why we were set up was there's a real need in Australia to be driven towards a long-term vision for our industry. So the government has recognised that food and agribusiness is one of the priority areas for our country. We have a history of making raw materials, producing food, for not only for Australia but for the world. Obviously not feeding the whole world, we cannot feed the whole world. So our mandate was really about how do we grow our share of food in the global marketplace, and so it's about how do we become more innovative, more competitive and productive in the industry. I represent 180,000 businesses across Australia. We employ over 500,000 people across the sector, not only in agriculture but also in food. And it's a really exciting time in our industry because, I don't know if you're aware, but Australia's had about 25 years of economic growth. We are, as a country, quite lazy. We are doing quite well, and we have enough food to feed 60 million people. I don't know what I did then, but it was obviously Don't do it again. Don't do it again. So we have enough food to feed 60 million people. So we have some really interesting challenges of what do we do, and we have a large country. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we are doing to promote food safety and the challenges that we've had as a country just recently. And it'll be just quite interesting to spike your interest of how do we take food safety to the next level. Can I get you to... Oh, okay, got it. Okay, that's me, so I've done that. Just for those of you who don't know, this is our beautiful country. It is a beautiful country in many ways, but I also live in a place called Sydney. It is beautiful because we have a lot of harbour, and just to make you jealous, we had 25 degrees 2 weeks ago in Sydney, and guess what? It's the middle of winter. So not that I'm going to dwell on that, but Australia has been well known around the world for producing a lot of raw materials. We produce a lot of wheat, a lot of different grains, a lot of fruit and vegetables, but also we produce a lot of meat as well. And we do a lot of export of cattle, and we also have other ingredients such as dairy powders as well. So we do produce finished products too. And we are known around the world for being clean, green and safe, and I think there's other people around the world too, so I think it's appropriate that we're using the green colours throughout the branding in my presentation today. So on that note, I just wanted to talk, we have a very good regulatory system in terms of the standards, and we tend to draw upon our partners not only in Europe but also in America. And so a lot of the things that we implement in Australia is because we decide to just copy yourselves who do a lot of the great investment in this space. But in 2015 we had a really interesting scenario. We called it the scary berries, and what happened was 4 people contracted hepatitis A after eating frozen berries, and there was a lot of media attention because 1, people contracted the disease, but 2, it was found out that the berries were from overseas. So you can imagine all of a sudden the consumers, there's a lot of outcry to say, well, we had no idea that the food that was eaten was actually from overseas. And it caused a lot of tension, a lot of political pressure was put on the ministers at the time to say, well, what are you going to do to react? The Victorian government helped the situation. So I don't know if you're aware in Australia, but we have a federal government, we then have a state government, and then we have local government. So there's many areas of government we have to align to actually implement policy and make change in this country. So the Victorian government did a bit of homework. I don't know how thorough their homework was, but they said, well, we know that the hepatitis A came from the frozen berries. We also know that the name of the brand of the products were Nana's Pies, and we also know the name of the company that makes that product. So you can imagine Paddy's Foods were very pleased when they had their whole name plastered in the media to say that they were the cause of the hepatitis A outbreak in Australia. And that caused a lot of tension. And as a result of that, the federal government had no choice. So this was in 2015, the incident happened. On the 1st of July in 2016, the federal government launched a new Food Labelling Act, and that was basically to give the consumers confidence and the transparency that they knew what they were eating was where it was made and where it was from. And so now you've got some ingredients, for example, you can see what's grown in Australia, so it's effectively a bit of the pointer's not working, but you can see what you're getting. So basically the more percentage is being made in Australia from raw materials from Australia, you get a greater percentage. And this is just about giving the consumers visibility about what they're eating, and they've got more control. So this was implemented in 2016, but of course the interesting fact is that it's caused a lot of cost to the industry, and the people that are bearing the cost are the food processors, the manufacturers, and the retailers. The retailers have had to reconfigure the whole supply chain of how they source material in their warehouses. And when I was talking to one of the major retailers, he said, well, consumers aren't going to pay for this. We are wearing the cost of this implementation of this new legislation in the country. So it's a classic example of where you don't have all the evidence and the benefits of why you're doing this, and then you impose legislation on an industry which is already burdened and has a lot of cost imposed by compliance in the regulation. But the interesting thing is, the issue of the scary berries has not been confirmed. So here we are, have accused that it's from overseas berries that have come into the country that have caused a problem, and potentially they're handling issues, and in fact the jury's still out, we haven't decided. So what did my organisation do? So what we decided to do is work with the Victorian government, because the incident happened in Victoria, and we have funding to do innovation. And we thought, fantastic, we've had some scares in the food safety space, let's innovate and let's get the industry thinking differently about systems and processes of how they can do things that's going to give them some benefits and make the food safer to eat. The funding is 1 for 1, so we've got to have skin in the game, and someone mentioned earlier this morning about enterprise having skin in the game. So we'll provide up to $100,000 and they've got to match it. It's only for short-term tactical innovations, not for massive, new to the world type innovations. And it was a joint partnership with the Victorian government, and guess what? We struggled to get companies to apply. We struggled to get companies interested in this funding. So here we are saying you've got money to do innovation, and they're struggling, and they don't want to do it. And you know why? When we actually started to talk to them, they said, well, if we do a project on food safety, that's admitting that our food is not safe to eat now and that we have an issue. And that would mean that regulators will come and scrutinise us and potentially cause us fines. And that's we had to rethink the whole strategy. So we had to rebadge the approach to the funding, and we said, well, okay, as long as you do one element of food safety in your project as a secondary theme, focus on quality or process improvement, then we'll support you. And that's how we got the project up and running. It was still a challenge because companies don't like to admit that they've got a problem with food safety. So just to give you an example of some of the projects we funded a company who's looking at how do you concentrate up using a novel technology called forward osmosis. How do you concentrate the solids, so you're reducing the cost of drying or evaporating more water. But the real focus was here, how do you remove the pathogens in the new novel process. We also worked with one of the largest olive oil producers in Australia. They have about 5 million tonnes of organic pulp, olive pulp. And one of the things they're looking at doing is how do they process the pulp, make the process more effective, but also how do you put in food safety handling practices within the actual whole process system. And finally, we worked with the seafood industry in terms of training. It's actually quite interesting that the individual, we trained up to about 40 different companies, and none of them wanted to do the training on their own for the same reason that I mentioned earlier. So we developed a training program where we brought them all together on different approaches to food safety and how do you make your process a lot more better for minimally processed seafood products. So by changing the approach, we're actually able to address food safety and in innovative approaches, but we couldn't do it overtly. We had to do it in a disguised way. So I hope it shows what I want to demonstrate today, that you do need the data, you do need the evidence, and one of the things I constantly in argument with my ministers is you do not introduce legislation until you have a lot of evidence to support what you're doing and why you're doing it, and there's got to be a benefit for doing it too. And secondly, you can innovate around food safety, but you might have to disguise it, as we did, to encourage companies to invest in that space. And my contact details are here, so if you want to follow up on anything, I'll be delighted to give you some further information. Thank you.
Thank you.